Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural Grants for Lunch session. We did put out an option for submitting questions beforehand, and we received one. I'm getting ahead of myself already. I'll first introduce you to our panelists today. Heather, since you've already been talking, please go ahead. Just give us like a 30-second who I am intro.
That was a smart thing to do because you can't stop me from talking. I'm Heather Maneval. I am the AFP board president. I am also the president at Maneval Consulting, which is my own tiny little nonprofit consultancy that focuses on helping all nonprofits, but our target is always small and mid-level. And I started my career in fundraising as a grant writer. Because I love structure and order and business plans, and I'm super excited about this session. So thank you so much, Brenda, for making this happen and for including me.
Absolutely. Couldn't have done it without you. Next, let's go to Jessica Vinton, another grant writer and panelist today.
Hi, I'm Jessica Vinton. I also started my career in grant writing for the Girl Scouts. I didn't really know anything about it, but I decided to give it a whirl and found that I love it. And I think it's part of this cool fundraising puzzle that we get to do. So I currently am the Director of Development for Brethren Housing Association. And I also have a consultant business called Nonprofit Jess. And I am, as of January 1st, the AFP VP of Education Committee. So I'm excited to be here too.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Jess. And our third panelist today is Joe. Go ahead, Joe, and introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, I hate when Heather goes before me because I have to say this, that I am the vice president of AFP and the vice president of Maneval Consulting. But similar to the other two panelists, I got my start in fundraising through grant writing. I was an English major. They said you can write, grants involve writing, why don't you try it? And I fell in love with the systems and getting the money going towards great causes and the opportunity to really make a big impact. And so it's been sharpening that sword for years and years, and very happy and very honored that I was asked to be included on this panel.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here with us, Joe. So we gave people the option of submitting questions ahead of time, and we received one question. So we're going to start off with that one. But be thinking about your grant related questions as we're talking through this topic, and we're going to invite those questions as we continue through this session today. So I'll go ahead and read this, and we have a panelist. Jess is going to take the first stab at this, and then we'll let other panelists join in. So the question is, what are the most cost-effective grant sourcing sites for nonprofits? Which grant sourcing sites have a bad reputation in the nonprofit sector? So go ahead, Jess.
All right. So I will just I'm just kind of going with what I have found to work. I think, cost effective is kind of, it's very, subjective to each individual. So I say that the most cost-effective grant sourcing site is Google, honestly, like doing your own Google search, figuring out what keywords you're looking for. And, at the end of the day, someone is sitting at a sourcing site looking at the same places we can look. So really, really cost effective, Google. If you're looking for paid sites, Candid, which was the foundation directory, you can get access to that at your library system. For a hot minute during COVID, they offered it online, which was pretty amazing, but now it's back to the library. So if you go to your library, many of them have it. I know Dauphin County Library System has it. You can go there and use it. I know that there's a cheaper version, but that doesn't really provide a comprehensive search. With the full paid site that you can go, use through the library, you can really get a sense of who what foundations are available, the sources, and like you look at their 990s, that kind of thing. So I think that's a good one. If you want to pay for one that I have found to be very comprehensive, I really like Instrumental. I've never used it personally, but I used it kind of like secondhand through a grant client that I had, and really liked how you could do an organized search and keep track of your of the foundations that you found, and even assign them to when you wanted to do them. And Amy loves Instrumental too, so there we go. We got a nod for that. One that I think the second part of the question about bad reputation, I don't know if it's about a bad reputation. One that I've never been impressed with is Grant Watch. I think we all get the emails probably, like no disrespect to their person who does that, but I did use it. I had a client who had a subscription and I was on it and looking around, and I just wasn't impressed with it. I thought it was difficult to use. So that's just my personal opinion. The other thing that you can do is sometimes you just want to know what grants are available, and instead of perfect, Dana says that her boss encouraged her to get a subscription, doesn't think it's worth it. So yay, me and Dana agree. Dana and I agree. So what I was going to say is sometimes you just want to know what the grants are out there. You don't need to really get a subscription. There are some amazing consultants in this area that create grant research reports for you. That can also be a cost-effective strategy for finding grants. I don't do that anymore, so I'm not plugging myself. I'm just saying that is a good, I'm plugging Heather and Joe and Brenda. Yeah, that's a really good way to get a really comprehensive list of what's available specific to your area without having to invest in a paid site. And then just a couple sourcing ideas I had that might just be helpful. One is like thinking about in your local area, wherever you are in PA, thinking about like your local businesses, your local health systems, anything that's in your area that might offer more than just like your sponsorships. Like I think about Elevance Health Foundation, that's a health system that now offers grants in addition to, the sponsorships and stuff. So just something like that. Obviously grants.gov for your federal searches. I do not endorse federal grants. That's just me. But it can be a whole other conversation. If you're looking for state specific, the state websites like the Department of Community and Economic Development, Department of Environmental Protection, those all have grant searching features on them where you can go and find some grants depending on, what the work you do. And then one other thing, and then I'll be done, I promise. Depending on what your donor database looks like, you can also consider some lapsed funders that you might find in there. When I came to, so this is my second time around at Brethren Housing Association, and my first time around, I did a deep dive into our donor database and found several foundations, just small foundations that had been overlooked due to like development turnover and stuff, and ended up bringing in like an extra $20,000 from those small foundations. I did my due diligence, made sure we hadn't burned bridges, made sure we're still good, and it had just been like an overlook type of thing. But that's another way that you can find folks who maybe already know who you are too. So that's what I got.
I'm jumping in first because I saw Anne shared something, and I just want to start with saying that Jess Vinton is a genius. So I agree with everything she said. I imagine Joe's going to disagree on the federal grant thing, so I'm going to give him time to respond there. But so Anne had shared the Foundation Center online, which is also the tool that I use. It's $450 a month. It used to be a lot more expensive, but they did make it cheaper for membership. Jess made a good point though. All these databases, what they're doing is they're pulling information off 990s. So two things to note. Oh, I should also say most libraries, which is what Ann Druck shared, have a foundation center subscription that you can access for free. So I used to do that at the YWCA in New York. I would just walk right on down to the library. So thank you, Ann. I totally forgot about that. And I'm glad to have you on our meeting today. But what I just put in the chat is, as Jess said, you can also do this research on your own. So this is a link right to the IRS website. So you can go and plug in the name of the foundation, pull all their 990s yourselves, and then you can look down, scroll down till you see a whole table of boxes, and it will tell you every grant they gave, who they gave it to, what the amount is, and why. So if what you're just looking at is, you have a few different organizations in the area, and you, let's say Powder Mill or the Foundation for Enhancing Communities, you don't have to spend $1,000 a year. You can just go right to the IRS and pull their 990s. And then my last caveat on that is that the other thing to consider with these softwares is that, as we all know, the IRS lost a ton of funding. And so they are years behind in processing 990s, which means that oftentimes when you go to the IRS website, you're not going to see anything from before 2021, which means that all of the changes in funding that happened after the pandemic, you're not seeing that captured because the IRS is so far behind in these 990s. Those websites that you're paying for, Foundation Center, Instrumental, whatever they are, it's good to see upcoming funding, but if you're just looking at past funding habits, if the IRS isn't updated, neither are they. So as the IRS is behind in processing these things, so are those different tools. So just something to be thinking about in terms of the value that right now, just no one can help it. We don't have updated 990 information, which is the public way of sharing what you've granted. So I'm shutting up.
I was not going to mention federal grants. I would not want to do that to anyone on this call, but I will second Jessica's reference to Google. Something I started doing is I set Google alerts for grants, Harrisburg grants, York grants, Lancaster. So every day I get emails of any time the word grant is mentioned in the news locally. Especially helpful for grants Harrisburg because that encapsulates all the government funding. So anytime the Governor Shapiro releases an RFP or they have a new opportunity with DCED or something, you get an email saying applications now being accepted for community development program or something like that. And so every day you just get a constant stream of things come in. And then when, let's say, another nonprofit sends out a press release saying, thank you so much, Community Foundation ABC, for your grant, you also would get an email about that if it's picked up by a news story. So then you would have that as a lead as well. So it's a real simple, easy, free thing. Just Google alerts, and you can go right there and do it for free.
Good stuff. Thank you, panelists. This got even deeper than I expected. So what a gift to me as a practicing grant writer and to our attendees today. So I'll open it up for your questions now. Feel free to unmute, come on camera if you want, or put your question in the chat. And in the meantime, we had a couple of questions or topics prepared. So we're just going to go into one of those because really the topic we just covered touched on each of these in one way or another. So Heather, I'm going to ask you to speak to grant readiness. Not every nonprofit, you alluded to it by talking about federal grants, or someone here, Jess said she doesn't endorse federal grants. I can be with you on that. And depending on the organization, it's appropriate for them to go for federal grants. So Heather, could you talk just a little bit about how an organization can know when they are ready to take on grants?
Absolutely. And I apologize for anyone that was on here earlier. I made this beautiful little outline of how I was going to respond to this to be concise because I am a very verbose person, and then I lost it. So I'm going to try to recreate the best I can. The first thing I'm going to do is put in a free resource here. That's the Grants Readiness Assessment. And this is from another women-owned business. It's Funding for Good. And so this tool, I would recommend taking a look at it, especially if you're a first-time nonprofit that's applying for grants, with a few caveats. This is like the creme de la creme checklist. So I would say if you're looking at applying for public and private grants, this is your checklist. Not every grant is going to require that same level of guidance and oversight. So if you're looking at it, I'm not going to share my screen because I'd much rather be able to see Brenda's face so I know if I'm droned on too long. What this organization goes over is your background information, tax documents, financial information, governance, program and project information. I think there's a whole other second page that I can't see. But here's the important thing to keep in mind. I work with a lot of organizations that are applying for grants for the very first time, or maybe they've applied for a few small grants and they're trying to figure out how to up their grant game. No two grants are the same, just like no two nonprofits are the same. Even if you're a nonprofit that's working under, a national structure, even when you get down to those grassroots on the boots, it's different. So in addition to, there's two things to really be thinking about. One, are you ready to apply? So what I just put in the chat, that will tell you if you're ready to apply for like major grants. The other thing you can do is when you sit down with each application, review those requirements. So the best part about grants is that they are intended to be the most equitable way to ask for funding, because the idea is that everybody is making a consistent ask, the same questions being requested, the same documents. We can get into a whole question about whether or not that has been carried out with the fullest intent at another point in time. I have my own thoughts, but that's not what Brenda's asking. So face each grant or arrive at each grant like it's its own very sweet individual baby nugget that's going to be asking for something different on the application side. Most of my clients don't think beyond the application, right? So when they start with us, later they do. They're thinking about the application. And then the other thing you have to be thinking about is not just getting the money, but using it. So in addition to thinking about if your grant application ready, make sure that you are ready to follow through on it. And so that doesn't just mean the organization as a whole. So looking at the requirements of the grant, so thinking about our buddy Androck, who I got to know her during her fabulous time when she was at the United Way. United Way has a lot of compliance for reporting on financials and on outcomes. So if you are a very small nonprofit and you're looking to get $10,000 for a program and it's about 2% of your budget, thinking about places like the United Way, the state, the county, think about your capacity for staff to be able to collect those outcomes and to report out on them. Also think about your finance capacity. So if you're a small nonprofit that doesn't have a CFO, maybe you have an outsourced bookkeeper and a treasurer who is a CPA, that's probably not going to be helpful if you're looking for government grants or grants that require really strong fiscal compliance, separation of funds. So always be thinking about, okay, if we go for this grant, is it going to make it possible for us to increase the capacity and infrastructure? So that's something like AFP, we're here to help with those things. So if you're a small nonprofit, I mean, you can see right now, Brenda, Joe, Jess, and I, 4 grant writers, we're all on the board. If you ever have a question, reach out to AFP and we're happy. One of us will jump in and help. Jen Jeweler, admin, always forwards us these emails, and we're happy to support you. So I'm going to be quiet now.
For now. Thanks, Heather. I like your approach to this and I couldn't agree more. I want to keep us moving here so we can get to our questions. So in the chat, we have a question. Do you have tips or tools to best demonstrate impact in grant applications? Who would like to take this one on, panelists?
I can
All right, Joe.
And I'll tie it back to another question that's a little later in the application about making initial contact. Because when you're trying to demonstrate impact, you want to make sure you demonstrate the impact that resonates most with the particular grantor. So if you're a food pantry and you're applying for a grant to, let's say, a healthcare company, you might want to focus on the health aspects of your work and how access to consistent healthy foods produce long-term health outcomes. And so really making sure you do your research ahead of time by reviewing their website, checking out their past grantees, and making initial contact with them if you can, which I like to do. I'm pretty shameless about making contact with grantors. You start a foundation to give away money, so you should expect to get calls and emails from people asking for money. I don't know, seems obvious to me, but still some people don't like doing that. So I will pull through the 99. If it's a foundation that is online, it has a website and clear application instructions and all that, I make sure I read everything first. So they'll just tell me to look at the website, and then I ask very specific questions that's not clear on the website and ask for an opportunity to meet them and talk through them. And so they have that face-to-face connection. If it's a foundation that, let's just say, only has a 990 as the only source of information, I will look through the board of directors or their staff on the different sections of the 990, share those with anyone at the organization, see if there's any contacts there, and then it's off to the wonderful world of LinkedIn, where you start stalking people on LinkedIn and reaching out potentially and just asking questions about their foundation and making sure you always leave with gratitude and appreciation for how they choose to spend their funds in that way.
Great. Thanks for that, Joe. Great. I'm going to move a little ahead in the questions in the chat. We have a question from Peggy. A lot of foundations associated with bigger private companies or banks do not include the attachment to their 990 listing the grantees. Any ideas how to access that info without a Google alert?
My quick answer for that is stalking their social media or anything that is going to be public relations oriented, because a lot of those nonprofits or a lot of those corporations, they're not keeping those funding items a secret. They want people to know because they want individuals to see the good that they're doing in the community. So look at their socials. If they have a newsletter, check it out. Look on their website. And look for anything where they're talking about their community impact or their community outreach. And if you see them out there with their employees doing volunteer stuff, those are the organizations that they're helping to support. So that's how you can do it from afar. And then, of course, the best way is to reach out to the person at the corporation that handles those things and just ask them, who are you giving? How are you doing it and why?
Yeah, I agree. I stalk those websites all the time. So we have another kind of a more specific question. I think I'm going to shoot this right to Joe. Can you talk about best practices rather for initial contact? Do I simply introduce myself, share about our organization, and ask if this is something their foundation would be interested in?
I've tried
Very
this.
practical question. Thanks.
I've tried this from a couple different perspectives. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes I do a lot of research. I scour their website, I learn all I can, and then I just come up with initial questions that maybe could use some clarification. Things like, if you don't award us the full amount, will you reward us a reduced amount or just deny us outright? Do you do multi-year funding? What kind of reporting requirements? And things like that. They're just really tangible, specific things. And then I will just make sure I email them saying, hey, we have some questions, looked over your website and think we're a good fit, but want to just bounce some more complex questions, ideas off you. And if that's the case and they have a website and someone you can actually email, they should be used to those kinds of conversations. If it's a generic family foundation that has no contact info and just 990 you somehow found on another nonprofit's annual report and then found their 990 on GuideStar, that's when you got to do that more digging and try and find a connection through your organization. Or if you're feeling bold, there is a number you can call them the 990 as well, which a lot of times goes to a bank or trust manager or something like, or foundation manager or something like that. But at least it gives you a starting point to hopefully make that conversation. And in that case, I would just say we're this nonprofit ABC, looking over your past grantees and worried about the community seems like we'd be a good fit. I just wanted to introduce ourselves and see if it's worth both of our times to talk about potential funding. And if you're going cold, probably get ignored. But if you've done your research and have some more connections or leads or even just something relatable to them, you might get some responses and even start a conversation.
Can I hop in?
Thanks, Joe.
Please
do.
I also I'm a big fan if you can do it, with dignity, and if you have a place that you can give a tour. That's really helpful. Just even sometimes people, if they're not they might want to just learn more about you for whatever reason. I actually just had a tour this morning and it's freezing out. So our tour was literally, we stood outside and I showed them down the block and all the houses we've just done. And then we came back inside to talk. So it just gives that that visual that can help then, and maybe it's not funding that they have, maybe it's volunteers, maybe it's whatever, but inviting them over to you if you can, is helpful also.
Yeah, if you can get to that point, we talk often about when we work with individual donors, it's similar to dating, and we don't make an ask the first time we meet them, like we don't get married on the first date. And it's the same with foundation representatives. We're all human beings. They happen to work for a foundation and you work for a nonprofit.
Right.
One other thing to just kind of back up a little bit, if you get into your research on this funder and it's not seeming like a good fit, it's probably not a good fit. If you're an animal welfare organization and they have never funded animal welfare, please don't think that you can change their mind. It's going to be a waste of time and energy. Maybe someday you'll meet them at an event. like the Meet the Funders session that AFP Central PA has coming up next week, plug, shameless. Maybe you spark a conversation and you find there's a new person who's become a trustee and they're interested in animal welfare. That's a slow dating kind of process. So just honor what that foundation is doing. We, as nonprofit fundraisers, need to bring in funds to continue these missions that we believe in so deeply. I get it. But if we're spending time going to Foundation A that doesn't want to hear from us instead of Foundation B that loves us, we're going to lose out on some time and money.
And
I'll get off on my little soapbox. Go ahead.
I just have one more thing. As I was also thinking, a lot of times we don't want people to set us up on dates, but they want to. And sometimes we have to urge them to set us up on these dates. So another, easy thing to do is to provide a list of foundations to your board, or, supporters of the, friends of your organization, and say all right, here are these foundations I want to apply to. Here are their board members. Do you have any connections here? And then you can go ahead and, maybe they'll set you up with one of them. That would be super great. And who knows, maybe it'll be love.
Maybe, hopefully we're coming up on Valentine's Day. We can all be matchmaking. All right. So I see Jilly put a question in here about small shop grant management tools. I invite you, Jilly, to watch the recording when that's sent out after this session, because we went into a pretty deep dive on that. Thanks, Jess, Heather, and Joe. We had a good conversation on that. Next, Amy asks, does anyone have experience with Grant Professionals Association and their certification program?
I do not personally, but I do know others who have gone through it, that I could always make some connections, Amy, if you're looking to do that. I believe Hannah Scherer over at Procopia in Pittsburgh has done it. I do believe Sam Dorm has completed that. And then another resource that, even though she's retired, I'm sure she would talk to you. Oh, I'm drawing a blank. Joe or Jess or Brenda save me. Wellspan Foundation grant writer. Anyway, when I remember, she was the grant director for Wellspan Foundation until recently, and she'd also hop on the CAC. Nancy Newton was a GPA as well. So she would be a great person to reach out to. Brenda, if or not Brenda, I'm sorry, Amy, I think you know Nancy. So I would suggest those folks who have done the GPA certification.
Brenda, I have a question. Could we go back to Jilly's question about the grant management? Did we touch on that?
You know what? I'm thinking grant sourcing, and this is talking about grant management. Yeah, thanks for catching that nuance, Jess.
Yeah, I caught that mostly because Heather and I were actually just talking about that yesterday. If you and there's a whole bunch of ways, but I will say that I just wanted to share the tool that I found to be most helpful. It's actually called GEMS. It's Grants Management Made Easy. There's a side for nonprofits and a side for consultants. I have found it to be very helpful to keep myself organized. So I did want to just mention that. You can use Google, Excel, there's a bunch of different ways, but as far as just, at one point I had 21 grant writing clients and I couldn't keep them straight. So having that helped to keep me organized.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that, Jess. If you have a link to that product, could you drop it into the chat, please? All right, moving right along. My fellow Brenda on the call has put a question in the chat. How best do we find out the deliverables to the grant? Often the grant application is very specific, but we don't know what the deliverables, timeline, and expectations for reporting will be, such as the exact report we will have to submit. I love this question. This is so relevant. As Heather pointed out, each funder is unique. We have snowflake funders and snowflake nonprofits working together to move these missions forward and to solve problems in our communities. So panelists, what are your thoughts on how to answer Brenda's question here? Go ahead, Heather.
Hey, if you don't mind. Brenda, I think that the first thing that I would say, and this tends to be like my go-to answer, but if you have some confusion and there's a contact person on the RFP or on the request for proposal, I just reach out to them. Generally, in my experience, when there's not a specific information about, normally it will say a final report, quarterly report, halfway report. If there's not something like that and there's no person to reach out to, then generally what the grantor is doing is giving you the opportunity to share what your project timeline is based on your actual plan for the organization. So if it's asking for a timeline of activities, the easy way to answer is to do the timeline of activities for your project. And then if you receive the grant and they say to you, we want a midpoint progress report, then that means that if you put in a 12-month grant and let's say you're going to open a new food shelter, a new food pantry, then you can say to them, like, let's pretend it's, you can actually do this. You could open it in 12 months. And if you look at that 6-month timeline and that's where you're at on the project, then just say, great, it's 6 months. This is going to be where we're at with the deliverable. So a lot of the times when they're not providing that, that's because they're not looking for you to provide something that's consistent or copacetic to their grant report. They're just asking a very broad question about your project timeline and where you think you'll be with your goals and outcomes at that point.
Good advice. Thanks, Heather. Joe and Jessica, any other thoughts on that topic?
No, I think what Heather, I agree with Heather. She's also a genius, so I agree with her. I do think that one of the most important things to remember is just be open and transparent with your funders. They are there to give you the money, help you make some sort of an impact in the community. And if you're having an issue with a timeline or deliverable, like, just don't wait till the end. That shouldn't be in your report. That should be a conversation you've had much earlier. And for example, we got money for a house. There was issues with the houses and we went back and said, could we use it here? And the funder said, yes. And that was like $150,000 that they let us use somewhere else because they cared about the program. And, but we were very transparent. We did not wait till the end to say, this isn't going to work. So.
Yeah, great point.
I agree with both Heather and Jessica, and something that I always recommend doing is looking at the report the second you get it. Don't wait until 2 weeks before it's due, because you always can tell when a certain grantor's reports are due, because all of a sudden all the nonprofits start mentioning them on social media. That's because the last question of the report is, how did you recognize us for this grant? And if you're doing that report at 11:59 the day before it's due, doesn't give you a whole lot of chances right there. So making sure that you stay on top of it the second you can get the information about the report, go ahead and read it and make sure you got everything in place. And I always like to make personal connections whenever I can. So any excuse to reach out to someone and ask questions and start a conversation, I always think only does good things for you and your organization in terms of grant applications.
I couldn't agree more, Joe. Back to that relationship building, really any chance that we have to call and any way that we can shift our mindset to being a partnership. We often look at grants, and early in my career, I was guilty of this every time. It's a transaction. We need money for this program. The foundation gave it to us. We're using it as we said we would. We're going to report out on it. But I shifted over to that partnership mindset where I say, oh, this funder is trying to accomplish something in the community. My nonprofit is trying to accomplish a similar thing, and we can work together to do that. All right, we've got a question from Anna. How can I be creative about securing grant funding for ongoing programs? How do I pitch it as a project? Really sweet question here. This is something I could have asked and I could ramble on forever about, and I will toss it to our panelists for now. Who wants to take a first stab at this?
I know we're all chomping at the bit, but I will be quiet and let Joe and Jess jump in first. So.
That's all you first.
Okay, so I see this as two issues. The first one is if your funder only wants to fund new projects, your ongoing program won't fit. You can't really be creative. I don't think you can. However, if you have an ongoing program and you have small projects within the program, for example, we have a transitional housing program. Within that bigger program, we have what we call Job Club, which is, people come and they, do resumes, blah, blah, blah. If we were hiring somebody to come in and teach that, we could definitely call that a project and we could apply for funding towards it. So I think you have to think about it. It's kind of the same thing when people say, like, how do we get general support? Well, how do we put this all into a big program and present it? Same thing. How, if you are looking to fund a project within a program, you need to kind of share, like, this is your big program, because you want them to know why this project is important. I love fundraising. Oh my gosh, like, these puzzle pieces just make me so happy. I hope that was helpful. Heather, Joe, you want to jump on it?
I second everything Jess said. If they say we will not fund existing programs or up overhead or admin costs or any of that, then they won't fund it. But if they say we're just going to fund projects or programs, then you just got to get a little creative with your budgeting. So if you have a program, let's say a therapy program, and you raise money to first general operations year over year, but you also know you need to purchase a few extra pieces of equipment, some supplies, maybe hire a new staff person. Then when you do that application, you pull the budget together, you don't apply for just those things. Those will be line items in that budget. And then also in that budget could be things like ongoing personnel costs, overhead, insurance, utilities, all those things that you need to make sure the entire program keeps running. And then the enhancements that you're looking to do are just line items in there. And then when you frame the application, you don't frame it as ongoing support for this program, you frame it as enhancements or special projects related to this program itself. And then hopefully they're not going to have you tie specific funds towards specific line items, which is a whole nother rant I could go on because that's not how money works. But then if they don't have you do that, you can just use the money how you get, however works best for your program, as long as you're upfront in your grant report and there's no stipulations or red tape in the RFP or grant requirements.
So I think Joe just really expertly also illustrated my prior point about being grant ready, where I was like, part of it's your capacity, right? So like when Joe's talking there to do all that kind of stuff, like that's a whole other area of expertise. And Joe's really great at finding a way to make those things that are challenging accessible to small nonprofits. So kudos to Joe. The other thing I would just add in here is that for our larger nonprofits, if you have a funder that is not like, we don't want to fund people, we won't want to fund overhead, we want to fund things, I would accept that and embrace it and use that as an opportunity. All the times that program staff tell you that they want money to do these like extra stuff, and you're like, girl, we can't even afford to keep the lights on. Those are the opportunities to be able to say, yeah, you want to do different therapeutic modalities and you need a sand therapy tray, this will pay for it. So if you're at a larger nonprofit and you can find a way to make these less complicated, so you're just buying supplies to enhance your program, crank out the application, get the funding. It's easy to report on, and don't overcomplicate it, because then you can spend more of your time building the relationships with those individual donors who will give you that undesignated funding. So, I think all three of us kind of covered it. You can approach it from any single way, but then sometimes it's just easier to be like, yeah, let's just make this a really simple grant application if your organization has that need. And to say, yeah, these are good funders, we can get that information, but let's not make them our priority. We need to be working with funders who are really looking at providing general operating grants, who are providing grants to help with the greatest need for the organization, especially because they're asking us to have so much infrastructure to report on these grants.
Right, that they're funding the things that we're already doing as an organization. We can get caught up in the temptation of mission drift. Oh, our mission is here and they're funding this. And if we just add this thing, we can get funding. And it takes so much capacity, so much energy and money within the organization to do that. It's not advisable, and it's not going to serve the organization, and it's not going to serve the funder. All right, another question here. Kristen asks, how do you deal with denials for grants that you put a lot of work into creating? With AI making writing a bit easier, do you foresee more competition for grants?
I'll do denials. Um, Denials I think are, obviously disappointing. Some funders, I think if you have the opportunity and can reach out for feedback on your application, I would say, a quick email. Thank you so much for, considering us. Would you be willing to share any feedback? Whatever. Some funders will say, no, we're not able to do that. Some will say it on their website. Some, depending on what, if you apply for like a SAMHSA grant, a lot of times you'll get feedback. I know the Lancaster County Community Foundation, they give feedback from their reviewers. So I think that would be what I would say, using their feedback to help you craft your next grant. I will also say that in this gigantic nonprofit competitive world, so many times it's literally just they had too many applications and not enough money. So I would not take a denial as, don't take it personally, because it's not, it is, I mean, it's a competition at the end of the day, and people, they have their interests. As far as like being prepared so that you're set, if a funder offers a webinar, if they offer time to ask questions, take that time so that you can provide the most closely aligned application. So it's just kind of that grant readiness piece too. But yeah, like I said, most of the time it's not because you did shoddy work, it's because they just couldn't do it.
Right.
I'm going to steal a quote that I got from a newsletter this morning from Seth Godin, where it was about dealing with rejection. And what he says is your application was rejected. You as an individual or nonprofit was not. So don't take it personally, to Jess's point. And I'm just going to sound like a broken record, but any excuse to reach out to people at a foundation or funder to start a conversation, start building that relationship, which is a good transition to the AI part, because that's what's going to separate the nonprofits that are successful, is those relationships and those efforts to really make those connections with the people behind the grantors, and not just dumping a bunch of stuff in Chat GPT and a bunch of random applications.
All right.
I
I'm
won't
gonna
say anything
bet-
because I can't even figure out how to use Chat GPT, and I've had a lot of people tell me that oh, Heather, I can show you, but no one has actually followed through on that. So I'll be quiet. But if anyone wants to show this somehow millennial dinosaur tech person how to use it, I would love to train a robot to do my job.
I'm a Gen Xer, and I have been getting into ChatGPT and trying to use it. Like, you only have 2,000 characters to tell the entire life's work of your organization, and I'm going to write 5,000 characters. So I've tried that. Oh, just shorten it, and it absolutely takes my voice and the voice of the organization away. So I have been shying away from using it. My clients pay me to make their application as strong as possible. So these are the times when I'm like down to the wire. I just need my brain to wake up a little bit more. I will put my grant narrative into ChatGPT or put a paragraph in there and just see what it comes back with to inspire me to go through the revisions.
So what
Now,
you're saying, Brenda, is robots will not be taking our job anytime soon. So
well, hopefully, unless there are a bunch of AI foundations that pop up that are completely run by these robots, then, I'll just go to Chat GPT and let it take over my job, and I'll have to go figure out my underwater basket weaving career or something like that. All right, we're at about quarter till the hour. I want to make sure we're honoring everyone's time. And I'm scrolling back up in the chat. We had an attendee who put 2 questions in at once. So I wanted to give other people a shot at their questions. Now I'm going back to this one. Do any of you use or endorse the use of logic models as a tool for building your grant application?
Oh,
Heather, you seem passionate. Go ahead, run with it.
Joe and I talked about this the other day. And Joe and Jess, one of you has to talk about Boulé, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to take it one step further. I'm going to take it back. Your grant application, what it should really be is just a summary of what your business plan is. And I truly believe that any good business plan, you've got to find some way to make it communicable. You got to be able to communicate it. It's not a pandemic. It's not as easy as a business plan. You've got to find some way to be able to communicate it to your staff, to your donors, to your board, to all of your stakeholders. If you were a visual person like me, then a logic model is your best friend. So not just for a grant application, I highly endorse, at least if you are the executive director, the CEO, if you're in a leadership position, either for the entire organization, for a new program, for a developing program, I highly recommend taking the time and sitting down and using a logic model template. One that I really like is RK Mellon, and it's on their foundation website. Very basic inputs, outputs table. I love to sit there and go through that as an exercise to help me figure out and organize strategically where all of the different components are coming for. So I strongly endorse for your projects, for your organizations as a whole, if you are a program manager, to have logic models and go through those exercises. If a grantor doesn't request one though, I wouldn't include it because if they haven't requested it, likely they're going to look at a logic model and it's going to make no sense to them. You know, logic models come with narration and a whole lot of other stuff. So absolutely logic models, I'm team for it. I'm being quiet.
Team for it. But like Heather said though, that I don't think that logic models are necessarily a grant tool. I think a logic model is a program tool that is necessary to go through the exercise of completing so that your grant writer can convey some of those pieces. So like when you're talking about outcomes or, you know, your outputs or whatever, that's all stuff that, you know, we can pull from the logic model. But it's definitely like an internal piece. I know there are places that ask for the logic model. But I think it's definitely an important tool to be using internally and to also be updating as your program changes. Like your logic model isn't necessarily like set in stone forever and always because programs change, you know, or you add pieces to programs or whatever. So.
And Joe, before you jump in, I just want to defend real quick, because I know Joe's going to have a really great rebuttal that's going to make me feel silly and outdated. But I will say on a grantor side, I absolutely denounce any grantor that sends out a template logic model and requires grantees to fill it in. Think a logic model, it's like your own DNA for your organization. Your logic model should absolutely be the logic model that your organization adapts so they can request them. But having a blanket format that everyone fills in, I think is nonsense. All right, Joe, I'm sorry, you can go. Now shame me.
Well, you just redeemed yourself with that last comment, so nice work. So that's my biggest issue with logic models is they're very prescriptive and saying your program has to fall into this specific format and align in these specific buckets. Not to mention every foundation has different words for how they want you to report their outcomes. Someone's outputs, another person's outcomes, or maybe they're measurable benchmarks, or was the objective the same as a goal? I still don't know. I've been doing this for years. So just when you get these foundations that have you put your program in these specific buckets and go through this really academic Western-based exercise, it really does just kind of push forward the societal norms and really pushes out a lot of organizations who may not really resonate with logic models. I'm not a visual learner, so to me, they're just another exercise, another hoop to jump through. Because a lot of times you already had the info in the application itself based off how the questions are asked and how it's laid out. So it just seems redundant and something that they're just pushing down from up top because it sounds like a cool thing to do.
I also agree with Joe. So I'm team for both of them.
Yes, good conversation here. We've got kind of a big topic here. Someone has put in the chat, talk about applying for grants from the big foundations, Gates, Bezos, etc. Go ahead, Heather.
I've wildly waved. I've been excited since I saw Peggy put this in here. I was like, logic models, what? All right, here's the thing to know. Don't even try to approach them. So when your board members are like, we need to be getting money for Mackenzie Scott, they are unapproachable. Unless you go to a website and there's an application and a way to fill them out, it's not happening. These gigantic foundations hire program officers who do not have any information that's out there. And their job, and I know several people who are in these roles, is to be behind the scenes, understanding what the organizations want to be funding and working with those key players. I have written these applications. The way that you get funding from these funders is that a mysterious email or phone call or something comes through. Generally, these funders, the program officers, they're working with federal agencies, they're working with HUD, they're working with the DOJ. And they're asking, who are you funding for these programs? Because they're trying to complement government dollars that are coming through. They hire consulting firms to go out and to scope for them. Do not waste your time trying to get in front of these organizations. They have a strategy if they want to be with your organization. Once you get the funds and you're invited, they're not asking you to build a relationship. It is very much, here is a Dropbox. Do not share information with anyone unless you want to lose your grant funding. Upload the things in a Dropbox and you will get a check. So, so there's a lot of folks that go out chasing for these. And then I'm going to be quiet because, of course, with the Mackenzie Scott Foundation opening, there is some difference there, but I'll shut up and let others respond.
So interestingly enough, I had a client who pre-Mackenzie Scott open application had been working with someone at a group, it was called Bridgespan, for a year, talking to them because they had an anonymous donor that wanted to give $1 million. About 18 months later, they called and they're like, we have a donor that wants to give you $5 million. Oh yeah, it's Mackenzie Scott. So they had no idea that that's who they were working with. So kind of to go with what Heather was saying, that's that, you know, pre-application, she was the same way. I didn't apply to the application, which I'm glad I didn't have to deal with that because it was multi-round. It was for a very specific, like, it was like what, less than $1 million, I think, as a budget. So yeah, that's all I have to say. It's really not anything, but I mean, I always think like sometimes the long shots you get lucky, but I wouldn't base your entire fundraising strategy on hopefully, you know, winning the lottery there. So
Right. Good responses. I'm thinking back to when I worked for the last nonprofit I worked for. One of our donors was a major gifts officer at a university, and she and I sat down for coffee one day, and I was talking about how, you know, board members come to you and they say, oh, you know, Mackenzie Scott just gave over there, can we get some of that money? And I was just talking about how it can take a long time to get people to understand. And she stopped me and she said, always remember, in your organization, you are the professor of philanthropy. And it takes time for people to learn how these things work. So remember to be patient, bring the evidence to them, show them how it works, bring them alongside you in that learning so that you can spread this throughout your organization, so that you break down this culture of, oh, let's go chase the big shiny thing, instead of let's build these partnerships that are going to move our mission forward.
And Brenda, this might go viral because I'm going to throw some shade at Mackenzie Scott. I don't know her personally. I'm really glad she's given some money to organizations that I absolutely love and enjoy. Jess, I do know a few clients who I help navigate the process of the open application. And here's the problem with it. If we want to talk about grant equity, the second phase after you submit is a peer review in which each grantee, after applying for the grant and, you know, running their own organization, was asked to review 6 other applications and score it. And in their opinion, that's equitable because other nonprofits are looking at. But here's the thing, it's no different than going to the grocery store and having to check out your own groceries. So the difference is, at least at the grocery store, you have an option to do it on your own because you don't want to talk to someone or have somebody else doing it. At this point, the model for that is Mackenzie Scott Foundation is getting free labor to review the grant applications when they should be doing themselves, or they should be going through the work to get volunteer committees of nonprofits and then also compensating them for their time. So I just across the board say all of those organizations are so out of touch and they're trying to flip philanthropy on its head, and it's making it worse. So I strongly endorse just, unless Mackenzie calls you, I'd ignore her.
Thanks. Look at that. Here we are, 3 minutes to the top of the hour. And we are going to be doing this monthly. So mark your calendar. It's the third Thursday of the month. My calendar was here a minute ago. That puts us at February 15th. And you will be seeing communications from the chapter, reminders to register for that. We're going to be updating our link because we had some link confusion this morning. Thank you all for hanging in with us and for using the correct link to get to us. And Heather, would you like to take another moment, please, to plug our program that's happening next Wednesday?
I would be so happy to, and I'm going to put a link in the chat here if I can find it. So Meet the Funders is going to be on Wednesday, next Wednesday, January 24th at the Highmark building. I just put the link in the chat for registration, and I'm going to upload our little graphic for you as well. We have 3 funders. We have Highmark Foundation, we have PNC Bank, and we also have Hershey. So I'm really excited about Hershey Resorts and Entertainment. We have not had them in front of our panel before, and I know for a lot of our grantees or members on the call, they don't really know how to access them. So Kathleen McGraw will be here. Katie Zimmerman, who you probably all remember as our former VP of Education. She's actually wrapping up her week at Central Penn Food Bank. She will announce that on her own time. She has a big, exciting job. She'll be our moderator for the session. She and Jess and I just finished up the script, sent off to the panelists, so we're really excited. So January 24th, 4 to 6 o'clock, all those questions about how do we approach funders, let's talk about applications, all of that is in the script. And so you can hear directly from 3 different corporations who are the hardest. They're the hardest to do the grant research on because they don't have to publicly report because they're not a nonprofit. They don't need to file the 990 if they don't have a separate foundation. So we're going to lift the veil. January 24th, 4 o'clock, register in advance. We've got about 5 slots open, so don't sit on it. And it's at the Highmark building. So hope to see you.
Got it. Thanks, Heather. Thanks everyone for attending today. Hope to see you next month. Please tell your friends, tell your frenemies, tell everyone who wants and needs to be more in the know about grants. And good luck to you all. And as Heather posted in the chat, you can always email your questions to the chapter administrator, and Jen will get those out to us. Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.